People who attended a wedding that turned into a complete disaster. What happened? I know this is tagged serious, but is it okay if it was also hysterically funny? A wedding was at a Napa Valley winery during the tech boom of the 90s. Groom, frat boyish VC funder on the climb. Bride, blonde, brittle, glossy. Both prone to using marketing and tech speak in conversation. Let's right-click on that and drill down. It's not an IRL shop, but more of a clicks and mortar thing, etc. The wedding invitation was in the form of a merger announcement in a mocked-up Wall Street Journal page, as in, Smith Global announces merger with Jones Limited. Combination delivers significant potential to drive long-term affection growth and market share of love. That kind of thing. Still, the guy was a friend, and my date and I went to show our support. First thing really weird that happened. The bride's twin brother came out before at the wedding, and got the bride to perch on a stool in front of everyone, and serenaded her, on his knees, with a guitar. He wrote the song. It was a love ballad with such barely concealed incestuous longing that everyone was frozen with discomfort. He sang of how beautiful his sister was, how any man would be lucky to have her. I can't remember the whole thing, but this lyric seared itself into my brain. Lips touching, tongues dancing. They give each other the look that can mean just one thing. It was not done for laughs. He was crying as he sang, and everyone watching looked like they wanted to drop through the floor. Then the wedding. 2 sets of chairs set up in a lovely courtyard garden. Aisle down the middle leading to a bower. We all seated ourselves on the chairs, which had white upholstery. The ceremony itself wasn't that bad. My date and I thought things might be picking up. It didn't last too long, and there were no more lurid songs from Bride's bro. But then it ended, and the minister said, "And now I ask each of you to reach under your chairs for the small white envelope you will find there. Each one contains a live monarch butterfly. We will release them into the air and let them soar free as a symbol of the love these two have for each other." Everyone froze. Whoever had set up the area had put the envelopes on, not under the chairs. White envelopes, little white envelopes on snow-white chair seats. Open-mouthed with horror, all the guests reached down and found the envelopes. We opened them, and most were dead, squashed into bloody smears. But a good amount were just horribly maimed, these poor butterflies that had been sat on for the better part of 45 minutes. We watched in shock as these broken-ass, mangled butterflies, missing a wing or some legs or a tail, flopped onto the ground and twitched out their death agonies. Moral, no incest, no live butterflies. That's all. Edit. The main question seemed to be, are they still married? Answer, I don't know. We weren't great friends to begin with, and then something happened that made us not be friends anymore at all, which is a whole other story. That involves no incest or mangled half-dead butterflies. How the hell does anyone just sit on a little white envelope? Answer, most folks at the wedding probably did what I did, i.e., walked a chair, see little white envelope, pick it up, had something written on the front like to be opened after the ceremony. So I tossed it back on the chair and sat on it. Better than holding it for the duration. And it probably had a little card or something, right? Certainly didn't expect it to contain something alive and crushable, and I didn't just toss mine under the chair because it was dirt/grass, and it seemed wrong to do that. Others just sat down and didn't see anything, they told me. I bet all of us check what we're sitting on way more carefully now. Is there a video of the wedding? Answer, yes, but I don't have one. See above regarding not friends anymore. We weren't close enough to rate getting a copy at the time, but I'm thinking I might try to find this guy online, see if they're still married, just to satisfy curiosity. We'll report back if I find anything, especially if it's hilarious and/or horrifying. As we're starting today off with an absolute banger, this is hilarious. I mean, I hate it for the butterflies, but it's just funny. It's just funny. You have to admit. You laughed, you chuckled a little bit. Come on, I can't be alone in this. Next story. Back in my youth, I was a wedding photographer, so sit down and let me regale you with the worst wedding I ever shot. The groom was a childhood friend of mine who grew up 1 block over. Our parents knew each other and liked each other, but he was a bit of a douchebag as a kid, so we lost touch about the start of puberty. The day I got the call about the wedding, I was 28, so hadn't seen the guy in 15 years at least. My mom was the caller, and she asked me to actually be in his wedding party. I told her the obvious, that I didn't much like the guy back then, we hadn't even spoken in a decade and a half, and I really didn't think that meant I was good for his wedding party. My mom told me that he hadn't had literally any friends over the years, so this would be a personal favor for her and to his mom. As part of the favor, my mom and I would do the photography of the wedding as our wedding gift. Reluctantly, I agreed. So I go over to meet everyone after all this time, and within seconds, I realize why I'm being asked for the favor. The friend hasn't brushed his teeth in years, and they are one solid mass. His bride is massively overweight and overbearing beyond belief. I suck it up, do my best, but the 4 months leading in are a nightmare. But when the wedding happens, and after the ceremony, which was actually nice, the bride decides literally out of the blue that she wants to have a white limo take her to the Hilton. It's June. There are no limos to be had. The Hilton is booked, but the best man, the groom's older brother, is furiously trying to find something and pay for it on his credit card because the bride is in full meltdown mode. In a fury, she rips her headpiece out, taking about a third of her hair with it, and storms into the back room of the hall. The groom says he's going to try and talk her down, and goes back there with her. A few minutes later, the double doors of the back room slam open, and he comes running out, with a butcher knife through his palm. He's streaming blood and screaming. She tackles him from behind, yanks the knife out of his hand. Ugh, that sound. And looks like she's going to stab him to death in front of the entire assembly. The best man and I both tackle her at once, and we're both grown men, but she's a total hellcat. The groom slips out, gets out of the hall, and runs to his car, but she also squirms free after biting the best man, and is maybe 30 seconds behind the groom. He's just backed out, and as he puts it into drive, she leaps on the hood and grabs the wipers. He guns it, and as he bottoms out on the exit of the parking lot and yanks the wheel, she rolls off onto the street and drills the far curb. As we run up to her, she's scratched all to hell and she's bawling. The wedding got annulled the next day. Turns out she'd been psychotic several times during her adolescence and adulthood, and was on a bevy of pills every day. She decided on her own not to take her meds on her wedding day because she wanted to be totally clear for the ceremony. Bad decision. Edit. For the many asking about the groom's teeth, he had so much plaque between them, there were no spaces between his teeth. If you got close, you could see the slight difference in color and see where tooth ended and plaque began, but from farther than a couple of feet away, they looked solid. The whole family looked like stereotypical trailer trash, like big 1980s mullets, rundown vehicles, etc. Next story. My cousin's was a effing crap show. To be fair, we all knew it was going to be something because his girlfriend, now wife, is completely psychotic. Anyway, their wedding was in the middle of August in the sweltering heat, in the middle of the woods. Mosquitoes as far as the eye can see. Most people didn't have a place to sit, and those that did had a nice splinter-filled wooden table, like you'd set up for camping. Their toddler was screaming throughout the entire ceremony. She, the bride, not the toddler, edited for clarity, was 9 months pregnant, cursing the entire time how hot it was. No crap. She smacked her dad as they walked down the aisle because he stepped on her toe. My brother's job was to walk up 2 goldfish to put in fish bowls as a sign of partnership, or whatever the F it meant. Except one of the fish were dead, so he dropped in 1 live fish and 1 dead fish. Need I say more? Next story. Elaborate outdoor ceremony. They had tents set up and a string quartet playing. Just as the bride and groom reach the altar, dark clouds start rolling in with distant booms of thunder. We were in huge tents, about 200 people, so we felt safe. Then, as they were about to take their vows, it started hailing golf ball-sized hail. For the most part, they bounced off the tents, but the downpour was so heavy and the wind so strong that you couldn't hear a word they said. The lawn turned into a slippery mud pit. The dance floor was floating away. As they got to the I do part, lightning hit nearby and everyone's ears were ringing. Part of the tent collapsed and everyone ran for the main house or their vehicles. They finished up the vows in the main hallway, and the marriage lasted 6 months. I think someone was trying to tell them something, and they wouldn't listen. Yeah, if there was ever an act of God, for lack of a better term, Mother Nature just, trying to, invoke an omen here, this would ultimately be it. My gosh, shocked it only lasted 6 months. Next story. Not a complete disaster, but the bride's mom wore what was basically a wedding dress and insisted on walking her daughter up the aisle with her father. They were divorced. There was not enough room for all three people to walk comfortably. After the wedding, we found out that the photographer had become enamored with the maid of honor, and at least 50% of the pictures he took were of her, and there were 0 portraits of just the bride and groom. Next story. Recently attended a wedding this past September. Bride and groom had been together for 11 years, high school sweethearts, could not possibly be more excited to marry each other. Ceremony went great, quick, emotional, everybody cried. They used the same venue for both the ceremony and the reception, and the bridal party were taking pictures when my boyfriend, who was in the wedding, asked if I could bring him out a drink. As soon as I got out there, all the groomsmen were standing around while bridesmaids and groom were flocked in a circle around the bride. She was sick to the point where she couldn't stand and had to be helped into the reception. This came out of nowhere. So they came in, did their first dance, danced with their parents, served dinner, and made an announcement that they were going to the hospital. They missed their entire reception. The wedding continued on well into the night, because that's what they wanted. And as we were getting ready to leave, we ran into them coming back to the hotel. Turns out it was a kidney stone. Not so much disaster, but just after 11 years and all the days for that to happen. What bad luck. Next story. I was a groomsman in a wedding where the chapel was in the middle of a golf course. To get to the chapel, you have to take an elevator down from the clubhouse. If you live in Missouri, you might know I'm talking about Big Cedar Lodge. So wedding time rolls around and all the groomsmen had spent the day drinking at the clubhouse. I had about 7 beers and I drank the least. Everyone is ready to go, but we're running a bit late. We take the elevator down and it gets stuck between floors. 10 groomsmen and a groom are now stuck in a standard-sized elevator. We call for help, and the person answering tells us the mechanic has gone home, so it will be some time. One of the groomsmen is claustrophobic, and does not handle this news well. After about an hour of standing shoulder to shoulder in a controlled panic, we all really effing have to pee. My best friend had an empty flask and pissed in it and filled it to the brim. It was really bad vibes in that elevator. Finally, the mechanic comes and does his magic, and we get to the floor of the golf course. We sprint across the golf course to get to the bathroom. We're about an hour late at this point. As we're sprinting across, the groom gets struck in the effing head by an errant golf ball, screams and plops to the ground. He's laying on the ground dazed with a bloody head. We call his dad, who comes running over from the chapel. Around this time, the golfer who hit the ball drives over in his cart and says, "Are you okay?" And effing drives off, leaving 11 dudes drunk, and one, we will later find out, has cranial hemorrhage. Dad runs over, not acknowledging us, and helps his son walk to his car and drives him to the emergency room. The wedding was canceled. Next story. Bride's father dropped dead during the ceremony. That was pretty horrible. Edit. Some asked for details. I didn't know the family of the bride very well. I had met them once or twice before, but we were just guests at the wedding. The guy was overweight, but otherwise healthy. He had a heart attack on the spot and dropped dead at 57. People at first thought it was a joke, but quickly realized it wasn't. The bride was understandably inconsolable, and the groom was shocked, but did his best trying to comfort her. They followed the ambulance to the hospital, and everyone just kind of stood there in the church for a while. The bride, as good a person as she is, had her maid of honor encourage everyone to go to the reception hall regardless, since it would have been a sunk cost anyway, and felt bad for her guests. I don't know if anyone went. When everything died down, a month or so later, the wedding party and a lot of the guests organized a really kick-ass barbecue for them to celebrate their wedding, since the ceremony was technically about over when it happened. Everyone also kicked in some money along with their wedding gifts to pay for the honeymoon that they ended up missing originally. They got a much-deserved all-expenses-paid week in St. Thomas. Well, obviously this is very tragic for something like this to happen in general, especially at a wedding, but it's also wholesome and heartwarming to know that, they had friends and family that rallied around them, had their back, lifted them up, and took care of them after the tragedy. Next story. My second cousin got married in Vermont in the springtime, and the weather report called for a chance of showers. As a result, they rented a huge, circus-sized tent to put up covering the entire meadow they were going to have the reception in. It easily covered all 80 attendees and tables and chairs. It was massive. The meadow was also next to a pond, which will come into play a little later. Their ceremony beforehand was in a church about 2 miles away. The bride arrived via motorcycle as her dad was in the local Harley-Davidson club. During the ceremony at the church, it started to rain outside. Just a drizzle, no big deal. The bride and groom hopped onto the backs of their motorcycle escorts, Harleys, and rode off into the reception venue. About a minute after they started off, the light drizzle turned into full-on tropical storm winds with sleet and hail. They did not turn back, but rode through the storm to the venue. When the rest of us arrived, we found quite a scene. The tent had come off its moorings. The groom and groomsmen all had their shirts off and were wrestling the tent back into place. The bride was completely soaked through her white dress and was covered in all the groomsmen's jackets while she waited for her change of clothes to arrive. She was actually very calm and cool the whole time, even laughed it up a bit. She's a pretty rad chick. The wind was blowing so much that the pond had 2-foot waves crashing over its edge and splashing one of the tables near the bridesmaids. The rest of the guests and I all ran up to help with the tent, and just as we were getting it back in place, the wind gusted in the opposite direction and literally blew one of the bridesmaids into the pond. So things did not go as planned. The bride and groom, however, remained jovial the entire time. They were terrific and never stopped smiling. The wind died down about 20 minutes later, and we were able to have the reception, with the only downside being that there was about an inch of water throughout the meadow for a while. Everyone got drenched, but we had a good time, and 2 beautiful people got married. This is awesome because no one ever lost sight of the reason why this event was happening in the first place. You're marrying your best friend, as the last line says, 2 beautiful people got married. At the end of the day, that is all that matters. Everything else is just window dressing. Next story. I didn't attend, but I worked at one that was a disaster. It was many years ago when I was a barman at an Irish hotel. The hotel was struggling, and so took a wedding booking from a well-known criminal family involved in drugs and burglary. Their daughter was marrying a member of a similar family from the other side of the country. These families were very large, so the wedding was huge. The bride has asked us not to serve vodka, which was making people pretty angry, as they were all in for the vodka and Red Bull. Most switched to cider, and we'd an entire shed full of the stuff. About 2 hours into the reception, crap hit the fan. The first sign something was wrong was that all the women suddenly made a beeline for the door. Thankfully, one of the floor managers had seen this before and pulled the waitresses out the moment she saw it. Once the women were clear of the floor, the men started laying into one another. I saw a bottle fly past, and we pulled the shutter down over the bar. It was the biggest brawl I've ever seen. Easily 50 men, pucking the heads off one another. Someone drove a car into our emergency exit. Chairs went through windows. The fight spilled out into the rest of the hotel, while the staff were locked behind the bar or in the kitchen. We called the garde, but they took their time coming, as they obviously didn't want to get into the middle of a massive brawl and were happy to let them tire each other out. We didn't have enough security to make any difference, as the owners were morons and couldn't afford it anyway. Finally, when it was over, we had to comp every other guest. We had a shed still full of cider, which we essentially had to do 3-for-2 offers on for months. We spent the rest of that night until about 4 in the morning cleaning up blood. I've never seen so much effing blood before or since, and glass, and human crap. The place never recovered. We had to cancel the next 3 weddings due to the damage, and once word got around, we couldn't get any more. Locals avoided the place. It was sold 6 months later at a huge loss. Next story. I posted this before, but here it is again. Bride vomited and peed on her wedding dress due to drinking too much. Groom threw a glass through a window because he was pissed that the other guests were fighting, and an enraged couple broke up with the lady, taking her ring off and throwing it at her now ex-fiancé. This was all at one wedding. The cops came and shut the whole thing down by 22:30. Next story. The hotel brought the wrong main meal during the reception, and rather than just shrug it off and get compensation later, the bride insisted they cook the whole thing from scratch for 100 people. This essentially brings the reception to an end, as now all the guests have to wait an extra 2 to 3 hours to get dinner, pushing back the speeches to the end of the night. The evening guests waited in the bar all night, then went home without ever seeing the happy couple. There was no time for dancing. That marriage didn't last. Next story. I went to a wedding a couple years ago. The groom and groomsmen had been drinking since 9 a.m. I wasn't in the wedding party, but about an hour before the wedding, I get a call from the best man. The officiant had stopped by and said that if they don't sober up, he wouldn't perform the wedding. I head up to the room and they're all crap-faced. I start having them do anything I had ever heard about sobering them. I know it doesn't actually work, but A, you gotta try something, and B, the officiant said that if the groom can get all the way to the front without falling over, he would consider him sober enough. They were that drunk. Somehow they sobered up enough, got dressed, got to the wedding. Poor bastard stood up there swaying, but somehow made it. The bride was not happy. Then came the reception. About 10 minutes in, one of the idiot groomsmen decided he needed a drink to calm his stomach. While looking toward the bride and groom, he started to projectile vomit. He got the bride, groom, and best man. I'm not sure how he's still alive after that. Next story. The priest during the ceremony kept calling the bride Elizabeth, despite her name being Kristen. The bride of the maid of honor tried to correct him, but he was so old and hard of hearing that he just kept continuing calling her the wrong name. This wedding also had that parents of the groom show up halfway through the ceremony. Next story. The worst wedding that I had to attend was where people were hype about their tenuous link to Scottish family and seeing a ton of people poorly attempt Scottish dancing, drinking whiskey and pretending to like it. No other option but warm Bucks fizz. Eating haggis and believing they were hilarious for flashing their pasty genital from underneath a rented kilt. It was like a racist stereotype gathering with a worrying, legally binding aspect to it for the poor bride. She had to cut the cake with a giant broadsword she could barely lift. She left the groom about 5 weeks after this fiasco. Next story. Went to a wedding in Virginia. The bride and groom had some serious relationship issues, but decided to get married anyway. The bride had a male stripper, that she probably slept with, for her bachelorette party, and the groom found out the night before. He wanted to even the score, despite having strippers he probably slept with at his bachelor party, and the night before the wedding hired a bunch of strippers/whores for him and his groomsmen. To top it off, they had a Catholic wedding, and that included confession before the ceremony. So the groom comes clean, 100% to the priest. The priest was not amused, to say the least. The result was the priest's sermon/speech to the happy couple, in front of all their parents, friends, and extended family, was not subtly veiled. Now that you two are married, stop effing other people. Next story. Went to a wedding where the groom had dated the same girl for like 6 years, and we all loved her. They broke up, and he married his jump-off piece like 6 months later. When people got the invite, they glanced at it and assumed he was marrying the long-term girlfriend. Got to the chapel and were like, who the F is this? It was an insanely expensive wedding with probably 200 people, but basically not everyone was treated the same. I found out at the reception that some people were given +1s. I wasn't one of them, so my then fiancé had to stay at home while I went to this wedding where I knew absolutely no one. I was okay with it because I thought it was a small wedding, but then I got there and started talking to people, and we realized some folks were allowed to bring dates and others weren't. Awkward. The bartender spent the entire reception trying to hit on the groom's 14-year-old sister by plying her with alcohol, and I had assigned seating at a table full of the groom's douchebag college bros. Just to top it off, they did the whole take pictures between the ceremony and the reception thing, which is fine, except it took 4 hours, and they didn't serve any food until the wedding party arrived. They were split within a year or two anyway. Good people, don't get me wrong, but holy crap, that was a bad wedding. Next story. Posted this about a year ago to a similar situation. It applies, so I figured I'd share again. My cousin got married in an eastern Kentucky small town. More of a holler, really. It was at least an hour drive from any hotels. Their wedding was in late June, in the middle of a field, in full sun. His wife designed the flowers and decorations, which amounted to some really sad-looking shade plants wilting in the sun, still in their plastic pots with hooks attached, just sitting in the aisle. It was above 90 degrees out, and they were 45 minutes late starting the ceremony. While we were sitting there, cooking in the sun, sweating through our nice clothes, they provided bottled water to help us cool down. But no one brought ice. The bottles were stored, warm, with no ice, in bright orange 20-gallon buckets with rope handles, which were placed on either side of the aisle. They did not do any kind of insect treatment to this field before the event. Mosquitoes and chiggers everywhere. The reception was held in the middle school cafeteria just down the road. They reused the prom decorations for their reception, because in this holler, apparently the high school prom happens in the middle school cafeteria. It smelled like old macaroni and cheese. The provided meal was quartered squares of bologna and ham sandwiches on Wonder Bread with a spread of condiments. The wedding cake was a sheet cake from Walmart with the Broncos logo on it. I should specify at this point that money was not an issue. They had a fairly large budget. They just thought this was good. Well, either they thought it was good or they're pocketing that money for down payment on a home or a upgraded honeymoon, but clearly, yeah, they skimped on the wedding knowingly. Next story. I haven't typed this out before, but here goes. It was my own wedding, and I wouldn't call it a disaster, but it was definitely tragic. We had our wedding in Costa Rica at a remote part of the Nicoya Peninsula. About 30 friends and family came along for the beach destination wedding, including 2 childhood friends of mine who are now together. Everything was going great when about 2 hours before the ceremony, my friend went for a quick swim. He got caught in a riptide, was pulled under, and drowned. After someone from the hotel staff got him out of the water, it had been 15 minutes, and he was definitely gone. Myself, the man from the hotel staff, and my friend's girlfriend started CPR while we waited for an emergency crew with a defibrillator to arrive. I alternated with the worker doing compressions while the girlfriend did the rescue breaths. It took just over an hour for the crew to arrive, check him, and declare the death, and get ready to transport him. Over an hour of CPR. After that, we had about an hour before the ceremony. I went to a quiet yoga room, meditated for 20 minutes, got cleaned up and dressed, and then got married. The ceremony itself was beautiful, somewhat hippie, spiritual, and a lot of love. My sister married us on the beach in the center of a circle of friends and family. Everyone there was so emotional. It was very much a celebration of life and love. Very intense. As I said, I wouldn't call the wedding a disaster, but the day was very tragic. I lost an amazing friend, and the world lost a really great guy. Next story. This story comes from my own wedding. I wouldn't call it a disaster, but it definitely could have turned that way. As the bridesmaids and groomsmen were lined up to walk down the aisle, I noticed my brother-in-law, a groomsman, has sunglasses resting on his head. I motioned him to take them off, and he tosses them to me. No idea why. From 20 feet away. I caught them, but it kind of hurt my thumb. I set the sunglasses aside and didn't think anything of it. Literally 10 seconds before my dad is supposed to walk me down the aisle, I feel trickling from my thumb. The sunglasses had cut my thumb and left a huge gash that was now running down to my elbow. My dad saw this and sprints to the bathroom, comes back with 20 feet worth of paper towels. He and the wedding coordinator wipe it all up, make sure there's none on my dress, then my dad creates a makeshift bandage out of paper towels, wraps it around my thumb, applies pressure to it as hard as he can, tells me how beautiful I look and how proud of me he is, tucks some paper towel out of sight in my bouquet in case I need it during the ceremony, and then he looked at the people keeping the door closed and said, "Let's go." Pretty awesome of my dad, the more I think of it. Next story. Our good friends were getting married and the whole college crew was there. Open bar, and my friend Lewis gets wasted and can't control the volume of his voice. Her parents were introducing the new bride and groom to everyone for their first dance when all you could hear was, "Oh, F you!" from the back. He was talking to someone else, but the entire wedding fell completely silent. After that, he caught the garter belt, ran around with it on his head, screaming at the top of his lungs. And an hour later, he's telling a cop to, quote, "Get that effing light out of my face," as he started a fight at the hotel. We had to describe his actions the entire drive home. Next story. I have 4. The bride's father was sick but attended the rehearsal dinner anyway. He was well for the wedding, but everyone else in the wedding party was sick. They cut out all the music and everyone washed very well after congratulating the bride and groom, who could barely stand. We all felt awful for him. The wedding was held in a chapel at the top of a skyscraper. Nice view. The problem is that the building engineer wasn't told about it and didn't turn on the air conditioning. It was 95 degrees outside and must have been 120 degrees inside, just like a sauna. The wedding was held outside on the shores of Lake Erie in June. Unfortunately, the weather turned foul and there were 50-mile-per-hour gusts off the lake and rain. They had a tent, but the rain was coming in horizontally. The groom backed out at the last minute, an hour before the wedding. Much drama. Wedding and reception canceled. The couple didn't return any presents, had a private wedding 6 months later. Next story. I suppose any wedding where the bride and groom successfully get married can't be considered a complete disaster, but this one came pretty close. A couple friends of mine had already been JOP, Justice of the Peace, married but wanted to have a nice reception with all the trimmings. I started to have a bad feeling about it when the bride insisted that this January wedding in Virginia should take place outside under canopies. "But January is cold," I told her, and she said, "We'll have space heaters, though." The tents she wanted were canopies without sides, so essentially she intended to heat the entire Earth with space heaters? Well, the date came around, and it would end up being one of the big storms that struck about 6-ish years ago. Not this most recent one. Snowpocalypse or Snowmageddon, I can't remember. I was not able to attend the wedding because I couldn't make the trip in the snow. But according to what I saw on Facebook, one of the outdoor tents collapsed in the snow and the other had to be taken down as it started to blow away. The wedding and reception were instead held inside the house whose yard they were originally intending to use, which was the groom's aunt's hoarder house. So the bride in her beautiful gown was photographed standing in front of a stack of boxes filled with trash. Those are her wedding pictures. I felt bad. No need to feel bad. This is what she wanted. This is what she planned for. And, again, at the end of the day, she got married. So who's really losing here? Next story. I was the best man's date to a wedding. Through this, bear in mind, I was only the best man's date and knew nobody in the wedding. There were 7 bridesmaids. 3 of them got into a car crash on the way to the rehearsal dinner. Fortunately, no one got hurt, but the car was totaled. One of them went home and didn't go to the wedding. They didn't arrange transportation for the wedding party from the hotel to the rehearsal. I offered to drive, but was kicked out of my own, new and first ever, car to make space for another bridesmaid, because that's what the bride asked for. The rehearsal dinner didn't start until 11 p.m., and most of the bride and groom's families didn't come because they couldn't wait and ate early. The bride was several hours late to the ceremony. It turns out that the horse and carriage that were supposed to transport the bride to the wedding had gone to the wrong hotel. This delayed it by over an hour. Eventually, they made it to her hotel and picked her and the wedding party up. The carriage was drawn by 2 horses. On the way to the wedding, one of the horses fell into a ditch and broke its leg. The other one watched this, had a heart attack, and died. The flower girl was on the carriage and was told that the horsey had gone to sleep. Also, the bride's sister had a severe allergic reaction to the food at the reception and had to be rushed to the hospital. Edit. The rehearsal ceremony was almost half an hour away, and they were already late. I expected my then boyfriend to stand up for me, except he didn't. So I definitely felt ambushed and didn't want to kick up a fuss. Good old-fashioned Britishness. I got one thank you text after the wedding. I was a pushover back then and agreed to a bunch of other favors, which I wrote but deleted, over that weekend. Also, the bride and groom's families ate at Nando's. Next story. I used to work in a non-denominational wedding venue, actually a bar/restaurant that had a license so people could have the ceremony and reception in the same building. We had an arranged marriage one day, devout Muslim family, so no alcohol. The bride and groom had never met before, only Skyped. It was basically a really awkward first date held in the middle of a lot of sober, unsmiling relatives. Not a disaster, as such, but supremely awkward and completely devoid of fun. The groom got lucky, though, as his arranged bride turned out to be stunning in person. The couple left at about 10 p.m. because they were tired. She didn't speak any English, so her thoughts go unrecorded, but we're pretty sure the guy was just anxious to get her home and be allowed to touch a girl without going to hell. Next story. After dating for 4 weeks and another 4 weeks of being engaged, girl from my high school decides that's long enough for the wedding. Emails out invites on Tuesday for the Sunday wedding, in her mother's backyard, which is actually the common area for the trailer park. Great start, let's go! Starts at 12 p.m. on Sunday, to be finished before the football game starts. No chairs for the guests to sit on. Ceremony takes about 45 minutes, as each the bride and groom reads 3 different sets of vows, poems, inspirational thoughts they found on Google. Groom is in camo and jeans. Bride wears a traditional white t-shirt that wasn't even stained. For the reception, that only had 15 minutes left before football started, delivery pizza, 4 pies, supermarket fried chicken wings, 2 boxes of 20 each, and 3 bags of chips. They were close to 40 people there. No silverware, napkins, or drinks, but one guy was selling pretty damn good moonshine. Come 1 p.m., dad of the bride comes yelling for people to leave so he can focus on the game. I wanted to stay around, figured a pig wrestling match or something was up next, but everyone else left, so I went to get lunch. Couple divorced less than 3 months later. I use quotes because apparently they never realized you had to file for a marriage license. The state just magically knew. Next story. My ex-sister-in-law's wedding. She was getting married to a guy she met on Facebook. Her family did not approve because he was black and Japanese and she was white. His family didn't like it either, but everyone just went along with it and put on happy faces. I was married to her brother, and we were really young and dumb and were fighting. We were both in the wedding, though, but at the wedding, when it was time to walk, my then drunk husband yells, "I'm not walking down the aisle with that female dog again. I already made that mistake once." And I was so embarrassed and hurt. I wound up paired with one of the groom's friends. Well, it became the talk of the wedding, and everyone was just in the crappiest moods. Ceremony comes and everyone is extremely drunk, and my ex-sister-in-law couldn't find her groom anywhere. I was still very upset over what my then husband had said, and I was trying to lay low because of it. The guy I had walked with came over and just talked to me and cheered me up a bit. The groom was found, with some girl that came with one of his cousins, making out behind the building. All the anger the bride felt towards her groom was then surpassed to me, because somehow everything going wrong was somehow my fault, so it ended in a huge argument. The bride and groom split 2 months later, but not before she moved 6 states away with him and got pregnant and caught him effing their neighbor's wife. I left my husband and actually wound up with the guy I walked with in the wedding. The bride's now been single mom for 7 years, and the groom just got out of jail for armed robbery. My ex-husband remarried and is with a real complete female dog. I've been with the guy I walked with for 8 years next month, and we have 2 kids together, so, at least for me, the wedding led to happier times. Next story. I went to a wedding last year that was a literal bloodbath. They had it in a barn. The barn door was open through most of the pre-reception setup and into the ceremony itself. At the end of the ceremony, they released a dozen doves. They didn't realize that if you're going to release doves, don't release them any place near open ceiling fans. Half of them flew back in, hit the metal fans, and exploded. Blood was everywhere. The bride was sobbing. The groom was pissed at the dove guy. It was chaos. My wife and I kinda just left. There was no saving that. TLDR, dead doves? I don't know what I was expecting. Next story. This was a bad one that I remember. Military guy and non-military girl getting married. Guy invites all his buddies from the service. CO was there, lots of dress uniforms in the house. Time to cut the cake and do the part where you smash the cake in each other's face. Girl takes the piece and rakes the cake over the guy's left chest and smears all the ribbons. Couldn't believe what happened. Most of the dressed military folks just left. The wife-to-be thought it was hilarious. Guy was embarrassed as F. Marriage didn't last. Next story. I volunteered at a hospital and they rented out the one hall for a wedding. I was in the kitchen that day as they needed people to carry heavy things. The bride was very eccentric and was being a bit of a bridezilla. She wanted over 200 candles on the front table. We approved 50. Anyway, she got her way and has what looks to be a bonfire in the middle of the room with that many candles on such a small table. The groom took his spot and she came walking in. She clipped the table, sending hot wax and fire to the floor. We tried to play it off by quickly throwing a rug over it, but it burned through and we had to make a scene with a fire extinguisher. She keeps walking, and on the altar, someone points out her dress is smoldering. The groom pats it out and says something along the lines of, "Told you you're smoking hot." I laughed as well as did other people. She did not. The ceremony was canceled and pushed to another day at another venue, and she attempted to not pay the hospital for the wasted food and staff. She also blamed us for the fire. Feel bad for that poor groom. Next story. I went to a traditional Catholic wedding that the reception slowly devolved into a super homoerotic dance party between the groom and groomsmen. I have nothing wrong with that, but the super religious bride, mother of the bride, and priest had looks of abject horror as the groom and groomsmen started tanking their shirts and pants and grinding together. There were even body shots, and all in all, kind of uncomfortable, but I got to smoke a J with a dude who looked, talked, and dressed just like MacGyver, so all in all, 8 out of 10, would do it over again. Next story. Outdoor wedding, in June, in southeast Texas to start. Rained all day up until 20 minutes before the ceremony. 100 degrees and humid as hell. The poor bride and her entire party look wilted, makeup and hair wide, and the guests were bickering about the heat. She still looked beautiful, even if she was wilted. Groom's white trash 500-pound sister, who showed up in jean shorts, flip-flops, and a Budweiser t-shirt, caused a scene by screaming at the bride and throwing red wine on her when the bride told her she couldn't sit at the table reserved for the bridal party, because she wasn't part of the bridal party. Screams in front of the whole reception that the bride is a whore and to go F herself. During the sparkler send-off, the bride's dress caught fire because an inattentive guest hit her with the end of their sparkler. She filed for divorce 4 months after the wedding date. We told her for 2 years that they were engaged, that he was an a-hole and she could do better, and that we were afraid she was making a mistake. Wasted $40,000 of her parents' money on a 4-month marriage. Next story. One of my best friends met his wife in this prison pen pal program. He was in for getting 4 DUIs in less than 12 months. Landed himself in jail for 12 months. I visited him a few times and he mentioned her, but it didn't seem serious. The day he got out, she was there waiting, having driven from out of state to meet him. 3 days days later, I got a drunken call from him at 2 a.m., and he said that he was getting married and blah blah blah. I needed to get downtown in the morning and be a witness and so on. I thought it was a joke or something, but sure enough, the next morning, they were going ahead with it. We live in Las Vegas, so they did the stereotypical Vegas chapel with a drive-through type wedding, and were married by an Elvis impersonator. My buddy was wildly hungover and had to stop during the ceremony twice to run out to the street and puke. It was effing hilarious and pathetic and sad and weird as hell. We never thought it would last, but she straightened his ass right out, got him to quit drinking, and got a job, started their own business, and 6 years later, they're still happily married. Go figure, right? Next story. I have one. Okay, so picture this. It's the middle of July, blistering hot, humid day, at least 35 degrees Celsius, so like 99% of other males, I wore a suit to this wedding not knowing where the reception was being held. Now think to yourself, where's the absolute worst place to have a summer wedding? A greenhouse. A effing greenhouse that was redone into an event space. Oh, and there was no AC. I sat outside the event the entire time, drinking lukewarm beer the entire time. Next story. The best man checked himself into a mental ward the morning of the ceremony without telling anyone. So I was promoted to best man about 4 hours before the wedding and had to write a speech while doing all the crap he was supposed to do. The ceremony was being held at a park at the top of a mountain with no cell service. The bride was over an hour late and no one had a way to reach her without driving about 20 minutes each way to get service. Everyone was thinking she bailed on the wedding, and some people were talking about leaving when she finally arrived. Next story. The wedding itself wasn't by any means a disaster, but I was the best man, and starting 2 weeks out from the wedding, the mother and stepfather of the bride began asking me repeatedly for my best man speech script so that they could get ready for it, make up audience cue cards like they do when they film live TV for the speech. Needless to say, I never gave them a script, but it made for a few very awkward conversations when I finally met them at the rehearsal dinner. It sounds like a great idea for a wedding. Let's just have cue cards and a laugh track in the background. That totally sounds like a good time. Next story. My brother got married a few years ago, and it was a cluster F from day one. His fiancée was nuts. Seriously, she was diagnosed with various mental health disorders early on in their relationship. Between the two of them, they essentially estranged everyone in my family before the wedding. My parents, who were funding pretty much the entire thing, ultimately decided to cut their support off about 3 months before the wedding. My brother and his fiancée, mostly the fiancée, then wrote an email to everyone invited to the wedding calling out my parents for their lack of support. This essentially fractured the family. Ultimately, about 60 people showed up to the wedding, only the most immediate members of my family. Bear in mind that I have a huge family. Weddings for other cousins of mine have been in the ballpark of 250 plus attendees. The day of the wedding was a continuation of how horrible everything leading up to it was. My brother and his fiancée stiffed payment for the officiant and failed to pay the caterers for food. Because of that, we were literally only served with a few platters of vegetables, and these were paid for by my parents on the spot. These are only a few of the horrible details that made up my brother's marriage to his now ex-wife. That whole relationship was a disaster, but the wedding was an especially bad episode for our family. Next story. A friend of mine told this story last year about a wedding she had attended the weekend before. I know she wasn't making this up because I saw the photos. Bride and groom have been together for a long time and have been trying to have children for years with no luck. They get engaged and begin planning this massive wedding when they find out that she finally is pregnant. The day of the wedding comes, when the bride is about 7 months along in her pregnancy. Everyone is having a blast at the reception, and then they realize that none of them has seen the bride or groom for a while. They go looking for them with no luck. A few minutes later, the groom comes out, carrying his new bride in her completely blood-soaked wedding gown. He carries her out to a waiting ambulance that he had apparently called from the bathroom he had been in with her. The bride gives birth to a baby that is very premature, but alive. The bride suffers a massive amount of blood loss and is unconscious. The baby's taken to a nearby hospital that's apparently better equipped for preemies. The mother's taken to a different hospital, which is apparently pretty far away. The groom spends his wedding day going back and forth between the two hospitals. When the bride wakes up, she insists on going to the other hospital to see her baby. The first pictures of them as a family are them looking down at their teeny baby, with the bride still wearing her tiara. This was several months ago now, and the baby is home and doing well. Yeah, so this is like some wild Game of Thrones style birthing, but you know what? I'm glad that it all worked out. Definitely a story to tell. And yeah, good for the family. Good for the family. Next story. I think I've talked about this before on Reddit, but mine was a bit of a disaster. My husband's stepmother approached me at the bridal shower and told me he was a loser and I shouldn't marry him. He'd never amounted to anything and had always been a F-up, she told me. She later gave money to the best man and asked him to take my husband to a strip club, then pay for an escort/prostitute. She told several groomsmen to try and talk him out of it. My father-in-law asked why our wedding was so cheap. I said, because we're paying for it ourselves. And he said, your dad doesn't have a job? He can't pay for his own daughter's wedding? I told him I was 26 and my father was ill. This was the morning of the wedding. My brother-in-law brought a girl he was seeing, unannounced. The girl stood outside and smoked the entire time. The stepmom pulled me aside at the rehearsal and told me I needed to make more time to make the girl feel comfortable. I should find a place for her in the wedding, she said. Later that night, brother-in-law stumbled over to my hotel room, drunk, saying his girlfriend was angry with him and they'd had a fight. Also mentioned that he was a better catch than his brother, my husband, and I should give him a chance. He lunged at me and started trying to kiss and lick my neck. During the actual wedding, stepmother and mother-in-law, husband's mom, both cried loudly because we didn't include them in the ceremony. They got into an argument at the reception. My grandfather yelled at and shoved me when he saw I had a tattoo. He said they were forbidden in the Bible and I should be ashamed of myself. My husband was in the military at the time and we'd actually legally gotten married at a courthouse 6 months before. We only had the wedding because all these family members had multiple grandkids from a variety of unmarried partners and wanted at least one of their children to have a church wedding. In retrospect, the whole thing was stupid. I wish we would have just eloped and had a tiny thing on the beach where he was stationed. Edited to add. Stepmom and father-in-law were divorced a couple of years later, and my 15th anniversary is next month. Also forgot to add that one of the bridesmaids was a young woman who I'd worked with as a social worker for several years. She faced many challenges and was not capable of supporting herself. Still, she was like a sister to me, and it was important I include her in my wedding. Groomsmen asked why we had someone mentally challenged in the wedding.